Indien, meine Damen und Herren. Wenn ich das höre, denke ich an leckeres Essen, an Farbenpracht, an chaotische Städte, Yoga, Gandhi, Bollywood und an Informatik. Mein heutiger Gast aber hat ganz andere Assoziationen. Arundhati Roy ist so etwas wie das schlechte Gewissen Indiens und vielleicht der ganzen Welt. Immer wieder zeigt sie, wie grausam ihr Land ist und wie viel Unterdrückung es nach wie vor gibt. Das tat sie bereits vor 20 Jahren mit ihrem Weltbestseller »Der Gott der kleinen Dinge« und auch jetzt wieder mit ihrem zweiten Roman, der pünktlich zur 70-Jahr-Feier der indischen Unabhängigkeit erscheint, »Das Ministerium des äußersten Glücks«. Arundhati Roy, ganz herzlich willkommen.
Thank you, thank you.
Ja, Indien hat gefeiert am 15. August 70 Jahre Unabhängigkeit von der britischen Kolonialmacht. Haben Sie auch gefeiert?
Oh no, I didn't. You know, I mean, I think we have a long way to go before we would be able to say that all the people of India are independent from all forms of colonialism.
Ja, weil diese Unabhängigkeit, das sind wir uns nicht bewusst, war auch damals eine Trennung. Das ist etwas, das wenige wissen. Und zwar es gab Indien und Pakistan wurde getrennt. Wir sehen das auf einer Karte. Und zwar in ein West- und ein Ost-Pakistan, das muslimisch ist und Indien mehrheitlich hinduistisch. Und aus dem Ostpakistan wurde dann 1971 Bangladesch. Das sehen wir auch auf dieser Karte. Wir schauen kurz rein in diese Unabhängigkeitsfeier und auch zurück 70 Jahre, was das für die Leute bedeutet hat damals, diese Unabhängigkeit, aber auch diese Trennung.
Well, you know,
Ein martialischer Gruß. Er gilt Premierminister Narendra Modis Auftritt an der Unabhängigkeitsfeier. Der kriegerische Ton, ihn wählt auch Modi am Anfang seiner Rede.
Sei es auf dem Meer oder an Land. Sei es im Cyberspace oder im Weltall. Indien kann sich in jeder Art und Weise verteidigen und es kann denen die Zuversicht nehmen, die dem Land schaden wollen.
Gleich zwei Länder können sich angesprochen fühlen. Einmal China. Seit Wochen gibt es Spannungen im Himalaya. Jeder behauptet, die Truppen des anderen besetzten fremdes Territorium. Zweitens natürlich Pakistan. Brennpunkt ist hier vor allem Kaschmir, seit der Unabhängigkeit von beiden Ländern beansprucht. Überhaupt Pakistan. Muhammad Ali Jinnah machte es unabhängig. Jawaharlal Nehru regierte als erster Premier den Rest Indiens. Es folgte ein Massenexodus, einer der größten der Geschichte. Millionen Hindus und Sikhs verließen in den nächsten Jahren Pakistan. Umgekehrt migrierten Millionen Muslime weg aus Indien. 10 bis 15 Millionen Menschen verloren so ihre Heimat. Überschattet wurde das Ganze durch furchtbare Massaker. Wohl 1 Million Menschen starben durch interreligiösen Terror. Zehntausende Frauen vergewaltigt, unzählige Familien getrennt. Auch Indiens Gegenwart ist nicht frei von Problemen. Modis forcierte Hindu-Politik hat das Potenzial, die Gesellschaft zu spalten.
Ja, Premierminister Narendra Modi ist seit 3 Jahren im Amt. Wer ist dieser Mann?
Well, he is a man who he was until he became Prime Minister in 2014. He was the Chief Minister of a state called Gujarat for several years. Fundamentally, you know, the thing is that India and Pakistan and Bangladesh were created, and we talk about partition. Mm-hmm. We don't ever talk about the violence of assimilation, because there were also about 500 princely kingdoms that had to, independent kingdom that had to choose between India and Pakistan. And the conflict in one of them, Kashmir, continues till today. And also, you know, countries, states in the northeast, Nagaland, Manipur. So the Indian army there has not been a day that has passed when the Indian army has not been deployed within its borders against its own people since 1947. Modi belongs to what is today the most powerful organization in India, which is called the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. It's not a political party. The BJP, which is the ruling party, is the political wing of this cultural guild called the RSS, which was...
Wir haben hier ein Bild, genau, das ist auch dieser Gruß wahrscheinlich, diese radikal-hinduistischen Kaderorganisation. Und was ist das Ziel dieser Organisation? Modi ist ja Mitglied von RSS.
Modi and several of his ministers are members, as was a previous Prime Minister, Vajpayee. The RSS was formed in the 1920s and believes in the idea of a Hindu nation. See, when you say India is a Hindu country or a Hindu majority, it's not true. It's a country which is made up of minorities. You know, there are Sikhs, there are Christians, there are Buddhists, and of course the largest Muslim population in the world, leaving aside Indonesia, perhaps. And the RSS in the 1920s onwards has been formed on the lines of European fascism. Many of its ideologues have openly said that, you know, Muslims are the Jews of India, are the Jews of Germany. And even today, when, for example, in 2002, when Modi was the chief minister, there was a massacre of Muslims. It wasn't the first massacre of Muslims that has taken place in India, but it was the first in the age of mass media. The first justified ideologically, not apologized for, you know. Mm-hmm. And often the chant is, even today, they chant. It's not just the RSS. They have lots of shady vigilantes, so you cannot legally hold them responsible, this organization, but it spreads this ideology of hatred, and the chant is often Musalman ka ek hi stan, Kabristan ya Pakistan, which means only one place for the Muslim, the graveyard of Pakistan, you know. And so today, the RSS, which has hundreds of thousands of volunteers, it has schools, it has publishing agencies, it has social workers, it has it's involved in the conversion, what they call conversion to Hinduism, and it is today spreading a situation where you have you know, people who are being vigilante mobs beating Muslims and Dalits to death on the rumor that they are eating beef or transporting cows, and you have minorities being ghettoized.
Warum erlebt diese nationalistische, hinduistische Bewegung, die weg von der Vielheit möchte, hin zu einer Einheit, gerade jetzt so einen Aufschwung? Was ist der Grund dafür?
Well, it's actually, you know, we have to understand that it's been coming since the 1920s. Like, in a way, it was inevitable that it was going to happen, you know. So when Modi was elected, there was this whole talk of finally, after hundreds of years, Hindu rule has returned and so on. So it's not like Trump. I mean, people confuse Modi with Trump. It's not like that. It's a situation, like Trump is an outlier.
Politische Außenseiter auch.
Yes, a political outlier. Whereas here it's a system that has pervaded every institution of democracy, most particularly the media, you know, and there's a fusion between sort of neoliberal corporate capital and this. And today the situation is very serious because the economy, which once promised you know, deliverance to this new middle class that was created, all that excitement of the 1990s is turning into panic. You know, we have what is known as jobless growth, but now even the growth is going plummeting. You have,
aber Indien hat, wenn ich fragen darf, 7% Wirtschaftswachstum, oder? Das ist enorm viel.
No, that is like recently started to drop, right? And that growth, in any case, came at a huge cost. You had hundreds of thousands of farmers who have killed themselves. You have millions of people being displaced from their lands. If you look at a city like Delhi, the outskirts of Delhi are like some medieval place, you know, where you have factory workers who are living in these, literally they're like concentration camps, you know. They have just not even enough money to survive. They are living in unbearable circumstances. Their working hours are just unlimited. And so you have a situation which is a crisis that's coming in a way from the bottom up, you know, and meeting this economic downturn, and all the anger is being turned downwards onto minorities, onto Dalits, onto people who are already oppressed. But so the frustration is being taken out in those ways. You know?
Sie sprechen schon all diese Probleme an, mit denen Sie sich in Ihren Romanen, aber auch in Ihren Essays beschäftigen, die enormen Ungerechtigkeiten, Ungleichheiten, Missstände. Darüber wollen wir gleich noch sprechen. Mich interessiert jetzt noch mal die Großwetterlage global gesehen. Weil wir erleben ja so etwas wie eine Sehnsucht nach diesen autoritären Persönlichkeiten hin zu einer identitären Politik, ob das bei Putin ist, bei Erdogan ist, bei Trump ist, bei Modi ist. Warum hat das mit der Globalisierung zu tun? Was ist der Grund dafür?
I suppose it does have something to do with globalization, you know, because when you try to create a situation in which there's a spreading of a kind of plastic and homogeneous culture across the world, and you know, this whole language of identity is also which is important and not important, you know, where people are being divided in ways in which they never question the overall order of what's going on. But the deeper the economic and environmental crisis, the more this happens, you know, like, for example, in India, you might see a conflict between two castes, or you might see a conflict between Hindus and Muslims. Sometimes that conflict does not have to do with those issues, but with the shrinking of resources, but with the inability to live on the land, with the diving water table. And how do you then lay claim to those resources? By resorting to your identity. Although in India, it is a society, of course, as we know, that has historically had in place the most cruel social hierarchy that human society could have invented, where it's supposedly divinely ordained.
Das Kastensystem.
The caste system,
Darüber werden wir gleich noch sprechen. Wenn wir über Hindus und Muslime sprechen und den Konflikt, den es schon sehr, sehr, sehr lange gibt in Indien, dann spielt auch Kaschmir eine große Rolle. Wir haben das gesehen im Film, aber er spielt auch in Ihrem Buch eine große Rolle, im ganzen zweiten Teil. Kann man sagen, dass Indien dieses Trauma der Trennung immer noch nicht verarbeitet hat, und zeigt sich das gerade jetzt in Kaschmir?
Well, they do call the conflict in Kashmir the unfinished business of partition. But, you know, I really have a problem with this word partition, because it suggests that there was once a whole, and that whole has been divided into lesser parts. Really, what was the whole, you know? What was this ancient Indian or Hindu civilization that called itself a country? Really, it was the British who marked out on a map that this is India. It was a country created by the British. And as I said, eventually a lot of assimilation happened, and the violence of that. For example, you could argue that the conflict in Kashmir is the conflict of assimilation and not partition, you know? So it was a princely kingdom. It was a princely kingdom with a Muslim majority and a Hindu king, who actually only at the last minute decided to accede to India. And then the conflict really began from there, because there was already a movement to overthrow the king before 1947 by his subjects. So, and always eventually gets cast in religious terms, you know. So, but actually the conflict in Kashmir is a conflict that both India and Pakistan would like to keep alive because it strengthens their local politics. Whereas it's not just about India and Pakistan, you know. I don't think that there is anything that can prove to you that the Kashmiris want to join Pakistan. Mm-hmm. It's, I think, a majority talk about Azadi. It's a very, very complicated conflict
ja,
now.
China ist auch noch eine Partei im ganzen Konflikt. Sehen Sie irgendeine Lösung?
Well, the resolution, before you can talk about a resolution, you should wonder whether anyone wants one. You know? And at the moment, the desire, certainly with this new Indian government in place, is to burn away the possibilities of any kind of conversation. You know, earlier there was the old, wily, intelligent statecraft where, you know, there were people who still were able to talk to each other, at least to maintain a status quo. But now you have a situation where the middle ground is burned away. So Kashmir is the most dense military occupation in the world. You have something like 600,000 Indian soldiers there. And now it's almost like a confrontation where initially in the 90s there was militants fighting the police, but now it's a militant population, the army, a militant population confronting a military. So it's a very, very dangerous situation.
Sie beschäftigen sich wirklich mit Kriegen, mit Katastrophen, mit Missständen, Ungerechtigkeiten. Trotzdem steht in Ihrem neuen Roman im Titel das Wort Glück. Können Sie überhaupt noch glücklich sein, wenn Sie sich die ganze Zeit mit diesen Ungerechtigkeiten und mit diesem Elend auseinandersetzen?
See, a lot of people think that the title, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, is a satirical one, but it's not, you know. And this is not really a book which is just a catalogue of horror, of wars and disasters and things. It's about people, very fragile people, who actually find humanity in the midst of all of this, find poetry, find music, find happiness in extraordinary and unusual places, it's about as much about love as it is about war. It's as much about people who know that happiness is not an institution and know how to recognize it when they come across it, and and truly, you know, in the last 20 years, walking through this place that I live in the hearts of so many conflicts, talking to people, it's, you know, like, I think it was James Baldwin who said, you know, why do people think that you have to sing sad songs sadly and happy songs happily? And you find the most hilarious black humor in Kashmir. You'll find the most ridiculous jokes among the guerrillas in the forest. And you find a kind of resilience that you don't find in desolate, you know, homes of political analysts.
Gehören für Sie diese beiden sehr unterschiedlichen Dinge, der Schrecken, das Elend und die Schönheit, irgendwie auch zusammen?
They do really, because in the midst of all horror, you do find beauty, you know, and in the midst of this kind of plastic, tinny beauty of TV advertisements, I find great horror.
Sie widmen das Buch ja den Ungetrösteten. Das heißt, Literatur kann auch trösten. Wie macht sie das?
I think by, you know, the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, or the God of Small Things for that matter, it's not, you know, it can never be a musical instrument with one string. You know, the whole point of being able to tell a story is to create a universe, to create a layered universe, a universe with streets and roads and courtyards and highways and blind alleys. And you invite a reader to walk through, like you'd invite a reader to, like you'd invite a traveler to walk through a city to understand it, you know. And so in the construction of a universe, you've got to traverse a spectrum of feelings and emotions, and it can't be just a manifesto or an ideology disguised as a novel where you're using characters as chessmen on your chessboard, you know. So it is, I mean, to me, both books are connected by 20 years of walking, of intellectual and emotional inquiry, and I feel like a sort of sedimentary rock, you know, with layers and layers. And sometimes I say the Ministry of Utmost Happiness is not just a city, but it's an underwater city. So when you first read it, you swim with the fish on top, and then gradually you swim with the fish in the middle, and then ultimately you swim with what are known as the bottom feeders. You know?
Ja, schönes Bild. Ich meine, auch der Vergleich mit der Stadt. Sie haben ja Architektur studiert. Auch die ganze Architektur des Buches, wenn man das zum ersten Mal liest, es ist auch anstrengend, das muss ich sagen, aber es lohnt sich, man kann eben genau diese Architektur verfolgen. Aber Sie haben mal gesagt, Schreiben ist für Sie auch so etwas wie ein Gebet. Das fand ich interessant. Warum?
Because it requires that kind of concentration, you know, and it's not a prayer, at least ought not to be a request or a demand for something from God, you know. But I think it's about the quality of concentration that you can bring to it, and that's why, to me, what makes me happiest in my life is when I have a task which calls upon all my skills, all my strength, all my concentration, physical as well as mental, you know. So I write with my fingernails and my hair and my brain and my heart and everything. And just that alone, regardless of what anyone thinks or doesn't think about the book, just the possibility of doing that in your life is a blessing. You know?
Und was viele Leser überrascht und begeistert, ist diese bilderreiche Sprache. Schon im ersten Buch, Der Gott der kleinen Dinge, da ist auch schon sehr viel Gesellschaftskritik drin. Aber es sind diese Metaphern und Bilder, die Sie immer bringen, die sehr kühn sind zum Teil, auch diese Metaphern. Was ist für Sie die Funktion oder der Wert einer guten Metapher?
Oh, if I try to assess that, I'd be an economist. I don't know about value, but it's just the way I am and the way I see things and the way I understand things, you know. To me...
Also Sie denken in diesen Vergleichen. Metapher ist ja immer auch ein Vergleich.
Yeah, it's a comparison. But it's also a poem, isn't it? In a way, it's the difference between let's say, it's a difference between watching a dance and plotting a graph of the dancer's movements. If you were to just describe without metaphor, it would be sometimes the bone, right, the skeleton, whereas the fluidity or the immediacy or the inexplicability of something comes with a metaphor.
Und bei mir ist es so, es verändert auch den Blick. Und manchmal ist es sehr erhellend, weil man etwas besser versteht, weil man es mit einem anderen Ding vergleichen kann. Ich habe den Eindruck, in Ihrer Literatur geht es im Wesentlichen auch darum, die Außenseiter ins Zentrum zu rücken und zu zeigen, dass diese Klassifizierungen nicht halten und so weiter. Und es gibt eine wunderschöne Stelle in dem Buch Der Gott der kleinen Dinge über Bananenmarmelade, die verboten ist, weil sie eben zu dünn sei für Marmelade und zu dick für Gelee. Sie habe, schreiben Sie, eine zweideutige, nicht klassifizierbare Konsistenz. Und die ganze Familie, das ist eine Familiengeschichte, der geht es auch so, die hat Schwierigkeiten mit Klassifikation. Sie schreiben, Sie alle pfuschten an den Gesetzen herum, die festlegten, wer wie geliebt werden sollte und wie sehr, an den Gesetzen, die Großmütter zu Großmüttern machten, Onkel zu Onkelmüttern zu Müttern, Cousinen zu Cousinen, Marmelade zu Marmelade und Gelee zu Gelee. Und sie selbst sind ja auch schwer zu klassifizieren, sage ich jetzt mal in Anführungs- und Schlusszeichen. Ihre Mutter ist syrische Christin aus Kerala, aus dem Süden Indiens. Der Vater ein Hindu aus Bengalen. Sie wuchsen dann aber auch bei der Großmutter auf. Ist das diese innere Diversität, ist das für Sie eine Bereicherung oder kann das auch eine Herausforderung sein?
Well, you know, actually, if you look at it, you know, outside of, let's say, the Indian community local perspective, what should be the big deal about my mother being a Christian and my father being a Hindu? And it shouldn't be a big deal. But it is because of the caste system in India, you know, because only 5% or less people marry outside caste. Because while, like you described India when we started off as, you know, anarchic and Gandhi and yoga and all that, truly, it's the opposite of anarchy there. The anarchy is for the traffic in the city, but in fact, it's a society that lives in an iron grid of caste. You know, so yes, my mother's a Syrian Christian, my father was a Bengali Hindu, and they divorced, and so I grew up in this little village where it was made clear to me from the time I was very small that I didn't belong to that community, which was not the same as being a Dalit and being oppressed in the ways that Dalits are oppressed in India, which is just horrible. But even they have a community, right? They belong to each other, whereas I belonged to nobody.
Sie sind einfach ein Individuum, ja.
Yeah, and you spent your time trying to understand why that should be so. And of course, it was a form of adversity that is a blessing for a writer, you know, because I think I became a writer when I was 5 years old because of that, you know, trying to look at a society which you lived in deeply, but you were not a part of, ever.
Ja, diesen Blick von außen, aber auch diese Vielfalt von Stimmen in sich
The
drin.
inside-outside thing, yeah.
Wir haben jetzt über das Kastensystem gesprochen. Die Dalits kamen vor, die Unberührbaren. Wir haben dazu eine Grafik, die dieses unglaublich komplizierte Kastensystem etwas versucht zu vereinfachen. Es gibt eigentlich 4 Hauptkasten, sogenannte Varnas, übersetzt heißt das Farben. Ganz oben stehen die Brahmanen, die Priester, Gelehrten, dann kommen Fürsten, Krieger, Bauern, Kaufleute, Knechte und so weiter. Und keine eigene Hauptkaste haben eben diese Dalits, die mit einer gewissen Unreinheit, soweit ich weiß, auch immer assoziiert werden. Die müssen zum Beispiel auch Kot anderer Leute wegputzen. Wir haben auch dazu ein paar schreckliche Bilder. Und dieses System ist heute noch relevant für die Partnerwahl, für die Berufswahl. Wir sehen hier die Bilder. Schrecklich. Ich frage mich aus der Distanz, wie kann sich so ein System bis heute halten?
It's actually shocking to me that it takes the world so long to understand. But this system, what we are seeing now, for example, just today in the papers there was an article that more people die in those manholes cleaning other people's shit than the soldiers that die in Kashmir. And you have a system where even today, everyone says, you know, India is globalized, it's growing, it's a superpower. But I have looked statistically at how does caste play out in this new capitalism. And you see that almost every major corporate house is owned by families of what are called banyas, the trading caste, all, you know. And if you look at who are the municipal sweepers, the government sweepers who clean the sewage systems, some of whom carry actually manual scavenging, meaning carrying shit on their heads? All are Dalits, all. So caste and capitalism have fused into a toxic system.
Wissen Sie, was mich überrascht, was ich dann nicht verstehe, ist, dass der Präsident, der gegenwärtige, auch ein Dalit ist, auch ein Unberührbarer. Und zwar gab es das davor auch schon. Wie kann denn das sein?
Well, the president is a ceremonial office. He has no real powers.
Nicht so wie der Ministerpräsident Modi?
Not at all, not at all. And we also had a Dalit president in the past, K.R. Narayan. And the whole trick about the office of the president is to always have a president which, you know, when the Sikhs are being massacred, then it's a Sikh president, it's a woman president, it's a Dalit president. So that's the showcase to keep the searchlight off what's really going on.
Ein Feigenblatt, also würden wir sagen.
Yeah.
Jetzt, wenn wir an Indien denken, spielt Mahatma Gandhi auch immer eine große Rolle und Sie bringen ihn in enge Verbindung mit diesem Kastensystem. Aber bevor wir über diese Verbindung sprechen, möchten wir noch kurz diesen Mythos Gandhi noch uns einmal zu Gemüte führen mit ein paar Bildern.
Am 2. Oktober 1869 war Indien indes jener Mann geboren, der es zur Unabhängigkeit führen sollte. Mohandas Gandhi, Sohn eines Ministers des Kleinstaates Porbandar, Angehöriger der Hindu-Kaste der Kaufleute. Erstmals richteten sich die Kameras der britischen Wochenschau auf ihn, als er 1920 seinen öffentlichen Kampf gegen die britische Herrschaft begann. Es war der Kampf ohne Waffen. Erstes Ziel: der wirtschaftliche Boykott gegen britische Waren, Unabhängigkeit der einheimischen Textilindustrie durch häusliches Spinnen. Bereits 1893 hatte Gandhi, in London zum Advokaten ausgebildet, in Südafrika seine politische Laufbahn als Führer der indischen Einwanderer begonnen. Unter dem Einfluss der indischen Idee des Ahimsa, das heißt des Nichtverletzens, der Bergpredigt und der Lehre Tolstois, hatte er hier den passiven Widerstand gegen entrechtende Gesetze organisiert. Doch in Südafrika wie in Indien kam es immer wieder, gegen den Willen und die Lehre Gandhis, zu gewaltsamen Ausschreitungen. Es ist leichter, die unterdrückten Massen zur Gewalt aufzurufen, schreibt Gandhi in seiner Geschichte meiner Experimente mit der Wahrheit, als sie zur Disziplin und gewaltlosem Widerstand anzuhalten. Gandhi wählte den schwierigeren Weg. Wirtschaftlicher Boykott, Nichtbeteiligung an Institutionen der britischen Verwaltung, bürgerlicher Ungehorsam, dies waren die Mittel, mit denen Gandhi das Ziel der Unabhängigkeit erreichen wollte.
Ja, und Sie sagen jetzt, diese Kämpfer für die Unabhängigkeit ohne Gewalt, der sei eigentlich ein Verfechter des Kastenwesens gewesen und Sie schreiben sogar ein Heiliger des Status quo. Das müssten Sie erläutern.
Well, look, it's very difficult to say anything in a few minutes because what you have to say must be responsible. And I've written a long sort of essay about it called The Doctor and the Saint, which was really about the debate between Gandhi and his most vociferous foe, Ambedkar, who was a Dalit and is today revered among Dalits. You go to India, you will never find a picture of Gandhi in a poor person's house. You will find a picture of Ambedkar. So I'll just try and be as brief as I can about it, but I would like people to read about it, you know, and everything I write is not an interpretation, it's a quote from the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi. So let's say that I would say it's one of the biggest myths and a falsification that has been put forward, which is not to say that Gandhi was not a brilliant man. Gandhi was an amazing politician, and he had a certain vision which I do respect even today. So I'm not trying to demonize him, but on the subject of caste and on the subject of race and on the subject of women, he was absolutely retrograde. You know, so what most people know, of course, is from Richard Attenborough's film, which was really not a correct picture. Gandhi maintained that caste was the genius of Hindu civilization. He did want the symbolism of untouchability to go, but he did not believe in entitlement. He did not believe that they had the right to represent themselves. He always said, I will represent them. In South Africa, the biggest myth about Gandhi is that he developed satyagraha to fight against racism in South Africa. His first victory in South Africa was to fight for a third entrance to be opened in the Durban post office so that Indians and black people do not share the same entrance. He fought consistently for different prisons for Indian prisoners because they should not be made to share prisons with savages. When he started Satyagraha, it was not about racial equality. It was to say that Indian traders should be allowed into the Transvaal to trade where they were prohibited. It was not about the indentured labor or their rights and so on. When he left South Africa, he first went to England, where he was awarded the Kaiser-e-Hind, which is the most prestigious civilian award the British Empire can give someone. They were hardly likely to be giving it to someone who was fighting them, you know. And then he came to India, where it was only in the first roundtable conference that happened in the 1930s, the British, of course, who were playing mischief, putting Muslims against Hindus, trying to divide and rule, as they say, and they announced what was known as a communal award, where and Ambedkar was the representative who went there, and he fought he's written a lot in great detail about why he believed Dalits for a period of time should have a separate electorate in order to develop themselves as a political society that voted for themselves so that they could, you know, the first steps towards equality. Gandhi argued against him, but the British still awarded what Ambedkar asked for. So Gandhi then came back to India and went on a fast to the death against Ambedkar. He was forced to step back, and that was known as the Pune Pact, which is today by many Dalits maintained as one of the most horrible things you could do to a community, to deny them the right to represent themselves, you know. And so if you read the writings, you know, consistently referring to black people, native South Africans as Kafirs, consistently talking about how upper caste Indians are really Aryans and should make common cause with the British. When he came back, insisting to the mill owners who were his friends that he would represent the labor unions. So there is a lot to Gandhi that ought to be admired. The Salt Satyagraha, I think, is one of the most brilliant pieces of political theatre anyone could devise. But there is a lot about him that intellectuals, academics, filmmakers, politicians, and the elite have falsified, and it is extremely dishonest. You know, today you have a system where you can have studies on identity, you can have studies on social hierarchies, and just not mention caste. The left has also never taken caste seriously, you know. So we do have a lot to account for.
Wir sehen hier noch diesen Dr. Ambedkar, der selbst Jurist war und auch die indische Verfassung mitgeschrieben hat, den Sie erwähnen, diesen Gegenspieler zu Mahatma Gandhi in dieser Sache.
See, he was to my mind, one of the most brilliant modern intellectuals of India, who, of course, you know, a lot of people say Gandhi had to go to South Africa to discover injustice. Ambedkar, as a Dalit in Maharashtra, was made to sit on a sackcloth on the floor on the side of his classroom. He was not allowed to drink water. He was not allowed to have his hair cut. He didn't have to go anywhere else to discover injustice. He discovered it right there in the village where he studied and grew up. You know, so there's a dishonesty all over the world on this subject.
Ich wollte Sie jetzt fragen, wie bekämpft man so ein System, das sich Jahrhunderte, Tausende lang irgendwie gefestigt hat und in der Mentalität der Menschen, in den Köpfen drin ist. Aber vielleicht braucht es zuerst einfach mal Aufklärung und Kritik.
So that's exactly what Ambedkar actually, you know, eventually the real problem is what is the difference between apartheid in South Africa then and caste in India. The difference is that one was a political system, the other is sanctified by a religion. So Ambedkar said that Hinduism for a untouchable is a chamber of horrors, you know, and he said that we, the Dalits, should convert to Buddhism. And that is the source of a great amount of violence. For example, anybody who, and today as the Hindu right is on the rise, claiming India as a Hindu country, at the same time they co-opt Ambedkar because they need the Dalit vote, you know. So it's a system of psychosis, of shattered thinking. But the real problem is that caste is not just a social practice, it is also sanctioned as a religious practice, you know. So you have temples where Dalits will not be allowed. You have situations today where, I mean, an upper caste farmer whose cow dies on his land will not touch that carcass, though the cow is the goddess and you'll be killed for eating beef. But once the cow dies, you must call the Dalit to clean the carcass and then flog him, as was done last year, because they are transporting the carcass of a cow. And we have today these vigilante gangs called cow protectors who are going around lynching people and flogging people and killing people for dealing in cattle or transporting cows or eating meat.
Also für mich in der Vorbereitung war schon sehr überraschend, wie viel Gewalt es gibt in diesem Land. Nicht nur Ungleichheit, sondern auch dieses Gewaltpotenzial gegen Frauen, gegen Muslime, gegen Unberührbare. Wo sehen Sie die Wurzel dieser Gewalt? Was ist der Grund letztlich für Sie?
Well, you know, sometimes you think that when a culture celebrates non-violence, perhaps the reason is that it is so violent, you know, and I think it's hard to say. I mean, it probably requires a deep social and philosophical inquiry into it. But today, for instance, the violence against women, it takes place for traditional reasons and modern reasons, you know. Caste has always meant that upper caste men feel free to go and pick up a Dalit woman and rape her, an indigenous tribal woman, and do what they like with her. When this new television, the internet, a new economy has women on the move, young women who see themselves differently, who have jobs, which is compared to the people who are losing what they have, a small percentage, but a large number. But the modernization of young women is also resulting in violence by men who feel they are losing control. You have military occupations, which have another kind of violence against women. So it's really a country that is nailed together by military intervention. I mean, 68,000 people killed in Kashmir, but in places like Nagaland and Manipur, the numbers could be higher. They don't do body counts, as they say in America, you know. But since 1947, the Indian Army has been deployed in Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, Kashmir, Punjab, Telangana, Chhattisgarh now, Goa, Hyderabad. And when you look at who are the people who live in these places, who was the army deployed against? Christians, Adivasis, Sikhs, Muslims, tribal people. So it's at the core this upper caste Hindu state, which is, you know, keeping everybody else in place. And if you argue against it, like for example with me, it might not mean that there'll be an argument against me, but they'll say she's not a Hindu, you know? Or the journalist who was recently killed 3 or 4 days ago, it was because she said that she was not a Hindu, she's a rationalist, you know?
Dafür wird man heute im heutigen Indien ermordet. Mich interessiert, Sie sind ja in Indien geblieben, nicht so wie andere Autoren und Autorinnen. Sie sind ja in Indien geblieben.
I stay in India.
Genau.
Yeah.
Haben Sie keine Angst, wenn Sie hören, dass Schriftstellerinnen, Journalistinnen ermordet werden?
See, the thing is that there are a lot of, there are a lot of great things about India too. You know, there's great resistance to all this, great argument. There are journalists, there are people who are standing up to it. And I don't feel like, you introduce me as the conscience of India. There are many like me, you know. I'm not some lone heroine who's fighting the shadows by myself.
Aber Sie sind die Stimme, die im Westen am bekanntesten ist, wahrscheinlich.
Yeah, well, maybe some more voices should be heard, you know, because it's not ever good for only one voice to be heard. And it's not, I don't want to position myself or feel like that, you know, because I'm a person who speaks surely with the voice of a writer, a novelist, and therefore, for good or for bad, a unique voice, but a voice that speaks from the heart of a crowd. I'm not the lonely writer who secludes myself. I'm the writer who lives in the heart of it all, you know? And therefore, I speak from positions of great solidarity. And so we, you know, obviously we do need to talk about the things we've talked about, but what we don't see is the magnificence of the resistance, the wisdom of the resistance, the understanding of environmental issues, of what this global marauding corporate global capital does. And the people, the most vulnerable people are fighting and sometimes winning, sometimes, you know. So it's a tremendous place. It's a place that I love, not as a country, but as a place, as a writer who understands all the nuances and why that leaf is moving and why that branch is not falling and why that one is, you know. So being fearless is stupid. Being tactical, understanding, and yet continuing to do what one does is important, you know. And I really cannot emphasize enough that I don't feel like some great heroine. I'm not interested in martyrdom or in idiotic bravery. I enjoy life and I enjoy writing, and I think it's important to do everything you can to survive, to be tactical, and to continue to argue and have fun and annoy the opposition.
Und vielleicht schützt Sie die Berühmtheit natürlich auch, die Sie haben, weil das wäre natürlich ein Riesenaufschrei, wenn jemand gegen Sie vorgehen würde. Sie haben jetzt
Well, it works both ways. It cuts both ways. You know, it also attracts the, you know, I mean, everybody knows that any case filed against me, any assault on me, it's like a job application to the government, you know. Look, we did this to her. So, you know, for example, my last book launch, not this one, but when a book of essays was launched, a group of people came and smashed up the stage and so on. And they are now the government's chief spokespeople in Delhi. So, it also is like that. It's, anything to do with me works like a job application. It attracts the attention of people who would like to shut you down,
Man hört immer, Indien sei die größte Demokratie der Welt mit 1,3 Milliarden Menschen. Für Sie ist es eher so etwas wie ein Polizeistaat. Und Sie sagen, es ist eine Frage der Zeit, bis Indien explodiert.
Yeah, it's like a democracy for some people, It's a democracy for the elite. And then the meaning of democracy has been shrunk to elections. And people do participate in elections in their millions because they must. It's all they have right now. Even if the choice is between people who don't seem like a choice, The Congress party, which of course Gandhi belonged to, ruled India
Die vor Modi an der Macht war.
Yeah, the power before Modi, but it prepared the ground. Because it was in its own way absolutely elitist, absolutely communal, absolutely upper casteist, It prepared the ground for the horror that we are seeing now. Many liberals prepared the ground for it. When some of us were sounding the warning bells many years ago, they say, oh, they are extreme, or they are left, or they are, alarmist, or they are hyperbolic. But now you're seeing what it was all about. I mean, from the nuclear tests in 1999 onwards, the public discourse completely changed. Things that you could not say publicly, you began to be able to say.
Das kann man als explizit machen. Sie sind ja auch eine große Globalisierungs- und Kapitalismuskritikerin. Mich interessiert da, wie gesagt, Sie haben jetzt gesagt, das Wirtschaftswachstum nimmt ab, aber 7% ist immer noch sehr hoch. Was schwebt Ihnen denn vor? Eine sozialere Marktwirtschaft oder was ganz anderes für Indien?
Well, first of all, it would be, when I started arguing about it, it was really about the problems you see in a country like India when essential infrastructure is privatized, And now the privatization of education, the privatization of health, the privatization of electricity, you're seeing, of course, the rise of the rise of a middle class, which to Europe and the West was extremely exciting. Even in India it was exciting because you had millions of people suddenly becoming part of a consumer market. What you didn't see was the millions of others that were being pushed into utter destitution, So there have to be some minimum safeguards, What you're seeing now is a culture in which the poor who used to have a space in the arts, in cinema, we were always aware of the fact that we were a poor country, But now the poor have been disappeared. There's no place for them in the villages. There's no place for them in the cities. There's no place for them in the imagination. So, for example, you have a civil war, which nobody ever talks about, in the heart of India, in the forested heart of India, where millions of indigenous people are being pushed off their lands because those lands have been signed over to private infrastructure corporations. So how do you go about it? You flood the forest with paramilitary. You go and burn down villages, rape and kill women. You create vigilante tribal armies who then make it seem like it's a civil war between those tribes. So how can you not criticize it? If you have 10 people in a room and 4 of them or 3 of them are extremely well off and having a really good time and have created a little universe of their own, and the rest of the 7 are in a lot of trouble, and you're talking about those 7 and people say, but why don't you talk about the positive? You know, yeah. It's not, and what is most dangerous is how sustainable is it? You know, when I talk about caste and capitalism, you see, like I said, the corporations are run by this trading caste. So India is not a country whose economy has grown because, like China, it's manufacturing something. Much of it is because of mining, of just being able to sell what you don't have to buy, you know, every businessman's dream. And so you're creating a situation where the water table is plummeting, the rivers are drying up, and you have a population that lives on the land. You know, it's not, and so you have an agricultural crisis. So in all sorts of ways, things are shaking, you know, but also it is, as I said, a country with a remarkable bandwidth of minds and wisdom. It's a country where people still haven't all been homogenized and still don't have the same consumerist dreams as everybody else, always, you know. So, yeah.
Die Geschichten, die zeigen Sie auch in Ihren Büchern, gerade die Geschichten von Globalisierungsverlierern. Nach einer Statistik verdienen 80% der indischen Bevölkerung weniger als $2 am Tag. Das ist frappierend, trotz dieses Wachstums, trotz dieser Reichheit. Ja. Mich interessiert zum Schluss, wie sehen Sie die Zukunft Ihres Landes?
Well, I'm very worried. I'm very, very worried, especially over the next 2 years, because, as I said, you know, the new middle class that was sitting in a plane waiting to take off, full of excitement, that plane has frozen in midair, and the excitement and exhilaration has turned to panic and anger. That anger is being, sort of directed now at, Muslims or Dalits or secular or Marxists or whatever it is. But at some point, and we are two years to the elections, and with, you know, I don't know if you heard about demonetization, where last year suddenly, 80% of the currency was declared illegal. That has resulted in the figures have just come out, in a real plummeting of jobs, of the growth rate itself. And so the only way that this dispensation can keep power in the next election is to create strife, to polarize people, to relight the fires, either by war or communal conflict. And so you can already see the threatening atmosphere that's building, you know. So I'm very, very, very worried about it, because the opposition has been decimated. So, you know, it's really the first time one feels that we're entering a time which we don't fully understand and haven't been in before.
Ich hoffe, dass Sie die Hoffnung nicht verlieren, trotz all dieser Missstände und der schwierigen Situation in Indien, und dass Sie weiterhin so schöne Bücher schreiben und Essays. Vielen Dank für das Gespräch, Arundhati Roy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nächste Woche spricht mein Kollege Juri Steiner mit Stefan Eicher. Ja, Sie haben richtig gehört, Stefan Eicher, er kommt wirklich. Das sollten Sie auf keinen Fall verpassen. Und vor 50 Jahren eröffnete Emil in Luzern das Kleintheater. Ein Grund, zurückzublicken und die Schweizer Kunstszene etwas genauer zu betrachten. Jetzt gleich in der Sternstunde Kunst. Also bleiben Sie dran und einen schönen Sonntag.